Toward morning, the sky had resumed its brilliant purity and its heat. The balloon ascended, and after several ineffectual attempts, fell into a current that, although not rapid, bore them toward the northwest. "We are not making progress," said the doctor. "If I am not mistaken, we have accomplished nearly half of our journey in 10 days, but at the rate at which we are going, it would take months to end it, and that is all the more vexatious that we are threatened with a lack of water." "But we'll find some," said Joe. "It is not to be thought of that we shouldn't discover some river, some stream or pond in all this vast extent of country." "I hope so. Now don't you think that it's Joe's cargo of stone that is keeping us back?" Kennedy asked this question only to tease Joe, and he did so the more willingly because he had, for a moment, shared the poor lad's hallucinations, but not finding anything in them, he had fallen back into the attitude of a strong-minded looker-on, and turned the affair off with a laugh. Joe cast a mournful glance at him, but the doctor made no reply. He was thinking, not without secret terror probably, of the vast solitudes of Sahara, for their whole weeks sometimes pass without the caravans meeting with a single spring of water. Occupied with these thoughts, he scrutinized every depression of the soil with the closest attention. These anxieties and the incidents recently occurring had not been without their effect upon the spirits of our 3 travelers. They conversed less, and were more wrapped in their own thoughts. Joe, clever lad as he was, seemed no longer the same person since his gaze had plunged into that ocean of gold. He kept entirely silent, and gazed incessantly upon the stony fragments heaped up in the car, worthless today, but of inestimable value tomorrow. The appearance of this part of Africa was, moreover, quite calculated to inspire alarm. The desert was gradually expanding around them. Not another village was to be seen, not even a collection of a few huts, and vegetation also was disappearing. Barely a few dwarf plants could now be noticed, like those on the wild heaths of Scotland. Then came the first tract of greyish sand and flint, with here and there a lentisk tree and brambles. In the midst of this sterility, the rudimental carcass of the globe appeared in ridges of sharply jutting rock. These symptoms of a totally dry and barren region greatly disquieted Dr. Ferguson. It seemed as though no caravan had ever braved this desert expanse, or it would have left visible traces of its encampments, or the whitened bones of men and animals. But nothing of the kind was to be seen, and the aeronauts felt that, ere long, an immensity of sand would cover the whole of this desolate region. However, there was no going back. They must go forward, and indeed the doctor asked for nothing better. He would even have welcomed a tempest to carry him beyond this country. But there was not a cloud in the sky. At the close of the day, the balloon had not made 30 miles. If there had been no lack of water, but there remained only 3 gallons in all, the doctor put aside 1 gallon, destined to quench the burning thirst that a heat of 90 degrees rendered intolerable. 2 gallons only then remained to supply the cylinder. Hence, they could produce no more than 480 cubic feet of gas, yet the cylinder consumed about 9 cubic feet per hour. Consequently, they could not keep on longer than 54 hours, and all this was a mathematical calculation. 54 hours, said the doctor to his companions. Therefore, as I am determined not to travel by night, for fear of passing some stream or pool, we have but 3 days and a half of journeying during which we must find water at all hazards. I have thought it my duty to make you aware of the real state of the case, as I have retained only 1 gallon for drinking, and we shall have to put ourselves on the shortest allowance. Put us on short allowance then, doctor, responded Kennedy, but we must not despair. We have 3 days left, you say? Yes, my dear Dick. Well, as grieving over the matter won't help us, in 3 days there will be time enough to decide upon what is to be done. In the meanwhile, let us redouble our vigilance. At their evening meal, the water was strictly measured out, and the brandy was increased in quantity in the punch they drank. But they had to be careful with the spirits, the latter being more likely to produce than to quench thirst. The car rested during the night upon an immense plateau, in which there was a deep hollow. Its height was scarcely 800 feet above the level of the sea. This circumstance gave the doctor some hope, since it recalled to his mind the conjectures of geographers concerning the existence of a vast stretch of water in the centre of Africa. But if such a lake really existed, the point was to reach it, and not a sign of change was visible in the motionless sky. To the tranquil night and its starry magnificence succeeded the unchanging daylight and the blazing rays of the sun, and from the earliest dawn the temperature became scorching. At 5 o'clock in the morning, the doctor gave the signal for departure, and for a considerable time, the balloon remained immovable in the leaden atmosphere. The doctor might have escaped this intense heat by rising into a higher range, but in order to do so, he would have had to consume a large quantity of water, a thing that had now become impossible. He contented himself, therefore, with keeping the balloon at 100 feet from the ground, and at that elevation, a feeble current drove it toward the western horizon. The breakfast consisted of a little dried meat and pemmican. By noon, the Victoria had advanced only a few miles. "We cannot go any faster," said the doctor. "We no longer command, we have to obey." "Ah, doctor, here is one of those occasions when a propeller would not be a thing to be despised." "Undoubtedly so, Dick, provided it would not require an expenditure of water to put it in motion, for in that case the situation would be precisely the same. Moreover, up to this time, nothing practical of the sort has been invented. Balloons are still at that point where ships were before the invention of steam. It took 6,000 years to invent propellers and screws, so we have time enough yet." "Confounded heat," said Joe, wiping away the perspiration that was streaming from his forehead. "If we had water, this heat would be of service to us, for it dilates the hydrogen in the balloon and diminishes the amount required in the spiral, although it is true that, if we were not short of the useful liquid, we should not have to economize it. Ah, that rascally savage who cost us the tank." "You don't regret, though, what you did, doctor?" "No, Dick, since it was in our power to save that unfortunate missionary from a horrible death. But the 100 pounds of water that we threw overboard would be very useful to us now. It would be 13 or 14 days more of progress secured, or quite enough to carry us over this desert." "We've made at least half the journey, haven't we?" asked Joe. "In distance, yes, but in duration, no, should the wind leave us, and it even now has a tendency to die away altogether." "Come, sir," said Joe again, "we must not complain. We've got along pretty well thus far, and whatever happens to me I can't get desperate. We'll find water, mind, I tell you so." The soil, however, ran lower from mile to mile. The undulations of the gold-bearing mountains they had left died away into the plain, like the last throes of exhausted nature. Scanty grass took the place of the fine trees of the east. Only a few belts of half-scorched herbage still contended against the invasion of the sand, and the huge rocks that had rolled down from the distant summits, crushed in their fall, had scattered in sharp-edged pebbles which soon again became coarse sand, and finally impalpable dust. "Here at last is Africa, such as you pictured it to yourself, Joe. Was I not right in saying, wait a little, eh?" "Well, master, it's all natural, at least heat and dust. It would be foolish to look for anything else in such a country. Do you see," he added, laughing, "I had no confidence for my part in your forests and your prairies. They were out of reason. What was the use of coming so far to find scenery just like England? Here's the first time that I believe in Africa, and I'm not sorry to get a taste of it." Toward evening, the doctor calculated that the balloon had not made 20 miles during that whole burning day, and a heated gloom closed in upon it, as soon as the sun had disappeared behind the horizon, which was traced against the sky with all the precision of a straight line. The next day was Thursday, the 1st of May, but the days followed each other with desperate monotony. Each morning was like the one that had preceded it. Noon poured down the same exhaustless rays, and night condensed in its shadow the scattered heat, which the ensuing day would again bequeath to the succeeding night. The wind, now scarcely observable, was rather a gasp than a breath, and the morning could almost be foreseen when even that gasp would cease. The doctor reacted against the gloominess of the situation, and retained all the coolness and self-possession of a disciplined heart. With his glass he scrutinized every quarter of the horizon. He saw the last rising ground gradually melting to the dead level, and the last vegetation disappearing, while before him stretched the immensity of the desert. The responsibility resting upon him pressed sorely, but he did not allow his disquiet to appear. Those two men, Dick and Joe, friends of his, both of them, he had induced to come with him almost by the force alone of friendship and of duty. Had he done well in that? Was it not like attempting to tread forbidden paths? Was he not in this trip trying to pass the borders of the impossible? Had not the Almighty reserved for later ages the knowledge of this inhospitable continent? All these thoughts, of the kind that arise in hours of discouragement, succeeded each other and multiplied in his mind, and by an irresistible association of ideas, the doctor allowed himself to be carried beyond the bounds of logic and of reason. After having established in his own mind what he should not have done, the next question was, what he should do then. Would it be impossible to retrace his steps? Were there not currents higher up that would waft him to less arid regions? Well informed with regard to the countries over which he had passed, he was utterly ignorant of those to come, and thus his conscience speaking aloud to him, he resolved in his turn to speak frankly to his two companions. He thereupon laid the whole state of the case plainly before them. He showed them what had been done, and what there was yet to do. At the worst they could return or attempt it at least. What did they think about it? "I have no other opinion than that of my excellent master," said Joe. "What he may have to suffer I can suffer, and that better than he can, perhaps. Where he goes, there I'll go." "And you, Kennedy?" Doctor, I'm not the man to despair. No one was less ignorant than I of the perils of the enterprise, but I did not want to see them from the moment that you determined to brave them. Under present circumstances, my opinion is that we should persevere, go clear to the end. Besides, to return looks to me quite as perilous as the other course. So onward, then, you may count upon us." "Thanks, my gallant friends," replied the doctor with much real feeling. "I expected such devotion as this, but I needed these encouraging words. Yet once again, thank you from the bottom of my heart." And with this, the three friends warmly grasped each other by the hand. "Now hear me," said the doctor. "According to my solar observations, we are not more than 300 miles from the Gulf of Guinea. The desert, therefore, cannot extend indefinitely, since the coast is inhabited, and the country has been explored for some distance back into the interior. If needs be, we can direct our course to that quarter, and it seems out of the question that we should not come across some oasis, or some well, where we could replenish our stock of water. But what we want now is the wind, for without it we are held here suspended in the air at a dead calm." "Let us wait with resignation," said the hunter. But each of the party in his turn vainly scanned the space around him during that long wearisome day. Nothing could be seen to form the basis of a hope. The very last inequalities of the soil disappeared with the setting sun, whose horizontal rays stretched in long lines of fire over the flat immensity. It was the desert. Our aeronauts had scarcely gone a distance of 15 miles, having expended, as on the preceding day, 135 cubic feet of gas to feed the cylinder, and 2 pints of water out of the remaining 8 had been sacrificed to the demands of intense thirst. The night passed quietly, too quietly indeed, but the doctor did not sleep. Chapter 25. A little philosophy, a cloud on the horizon, in the midst of a fog, the strange balloon, an exact view of the Victoria, the palm trees, traces of a caravan, the well in the midst of the desert. On the morrow there was the same purity of sky, the same stillness of the atmosphere. The balloon rose to an elevation of 500 feet, but it had scarcely changed its position to the westward in any perceptible degree. "We are right in the open desert," said the doctor. "Look at that vast reach of sand. What a strange spectacle, what a singular arrangement of nature. Why should there be in one place such extreme luxuriance of vegetation yonder, and here this extreme aridity, and that in the same latitude, and under the same rays of the sun?" "The why concerns me but little," answered Kennedy. "The reason interests me less than the fact. The thing is so, that's the important part of it." "Oh, it is well to philosophize a little, Dick. It does no harm." "Let us philosophize then, if you will. We have time enough before us, we are hardly moving. The wind is afraid to blow, it sleeps." "That will not last forever," put in Joe. "I think I see some banks of clouds in the east." "Joe's right," said the doctor after he had taken a look. "Good," said Kennedy. "Now for our clouds with a fine rain and a fresh wind to dash it into our faces." "Well, we'll see, Dick, we'll see." "But this is Friday, master, and I'm afraid of Fridays." "Well, I hope that this very day you'll get over those notions." "I hope so, master, too. Hugh," he added, mopping his face, "heat's a good thing, especially in winter, but in summer it don't do to take too much of it." "Don't you fear the effect of the sun's heat on our balloon?" asked Kennedy, addressing the doctor. "No, the gutta-percha coating resists much higher temperatures than even this. With my spiral I have subjected it inside to as much as 158 degrees sometimes, and the covering does not appear to have suffered." "A cloud, a real cloud," shouted Joe at this moment, for that piercing eyesight of his beat all the glasses. And in fact, a thick bank of vapour, now quite distinct, could be seen slowly emerging above the horizon. It appeared to be very deep, and as it were puffed out. It was in reality a conglomeration of smaller clouds. The latter invariably retained their original formation, and from this circumstance the doctor concluded that there was no current of air in their collected mass. This compact body of vapour had appeared about 8 o'clock in the morning, and by 11 it had already reached the height of the sun's disk. The latter then disappeared entirely behind the murky veil, and the lower belt of cloud at the same moment lifted above the line of the horizon, which was again disclosed in a full blaze of daylight. "It's only an isolated cloud," remarked the doctor. "It won't do to count much upon that. Look, Dick, its shape is just the same as when we saw it this morning." "Then, doctor, there's to be neither rain nor wind, at least for us." "I fear so. The cloud keeps at a great height." "Well, doctor, suppose we were to go in pursuit of this cloud, since it refuses to burst upon us?" "I fancy that to do so wouldn't help us much. It would be a consumption of gas and, consequently, of water to little purpose. But in our situation we must not leave anything untried. Therefore let us ascend." And with this the doctor put on a full head of flame from the cylinder, and the dilation of the hydrogen, occasioned by such sudden and intense heat, sent the balloon rapidly aloft. About 1,500 feet from the ground, it encountered an opaque mass of cloud, and entered a dense fog suspended at that elevation, but it did not meet with the least breath of wind. This fog seemed even destitute of humidity, and the articles brought in contact with it were scarcely dampened in the slightest degree. The balloon, completely enveloped in the vapour, gained a little increase of speed perhaps, and that was all. The doctor gloomily recognized what trifling success he had obtained from his manoeuvre, and was relapsing into deep meditation, when he heard Joe exclaim, in tones of most intense astonishment, "Ah, by all that's beautiful! What's the matter, Joe?" "Doctor, Mr. Kennedy, here's something curious." "What is it, then?" "We are not alone up here. There are rogues about, they've stolen our invention." "Has he gone crazy?" asked Kennedy. Joe stood there perfectly motionless, the very picture of amazement. "Can the hot sun have really affected the poor fellow's brain?" said the doctor, turning toward him. "Will you tell me?" "Look," said Joe, pointing to a certain quarter of the sky. "By St. James," exclaimed Kennedy in turn, "why, who would have believed it? Look, look, doctor." "I see it," said the doctor very quietly. "Another balloon, and other passengers like ourselves." And sure enough, there was another balloon about 200 paces from them, floating in the air with its car and its aeronauts. It was following exactly the same route as the Victoria. "Well," said the doctor, "nothing remains for us but to make signals, take the flag, Kennedy, and show them our colours." It seemed that the travellers by the other balloon had just the same idea at the same moment, for the same kind of flag repeated precisely the same salute with a hand that moved in just the same manner. "What does that mean?" asked Kennedy. "They are apes," said Joe, "imitating us." "It means," said the doctor, laughing, "that it is you, Dick, yourself, making that signal to yourself, or in other words that we see ourselves in the second balloon, which is no other than the Victoria." "As to that, master, with all respect to you," said Joe, "you'll never make me believe it." "Climb up on the edge of the car, Joe, wave your arms, and then you'll see." Joe obeyed, and all his gestures were instantaneously and exactly repeated. "It is merely the effect of the mirage," said the doctor, "and nothing else, a simple optical phenomenon due to the unequal refraction of light by different layers of the atmosphere, and that is all." "It's wonderful," said Joe, who could not make up his mind to surrender, but went on repeating his gesticulations. "What a curious sight. Do you know," said Kennedy, "that it's a real pleasure to have a view of our noble balloon in that style. She's a beauty, isn't she? And how stately her movements as she sweeps along." "You may explain the matter as you like," continued Joe. "It's a strange thing anyhow." But ere long this picture began to fade away. The clouds rose higher, leaving the balloon, which made no further attempt to follow them, and in about an hour they disappeared in the open sky. The wind, which had been scarcely perceptible, seemed still to diminish, and the doctor in perfect desperation descended toward the ground, and all three of the travellers, whom the incident just recorded had, for a few moments diverted from their anxieties, relapsed into gloomy meditation, sweltering the while beneath the scorching heat. About 4 o'clock, Joe descried some object standing out against the vast background of sand, and soon was able to declare positively that there were 2 palm trees at no great distance. "Palm trees," exclaimed Ferguson, "why then there's a spring, a well." He took up his glass and satisfied himself that Joe's eyes had not been mistaken. At length he said over and over again, "Water, water, and we are saved, for if we do move slowly still we move and we shall arrive at last." "Good, master, but suppose we were to drink a mouthful in the meantime, for this air is stifling." "Let us drink then, my boy." No one waited to be coaxed. A whole pint was swallowed then and there, reducing the total remaining supply to 3 pints and a half. "Ah, that does one good," said Joe. "Wasn't it fine? Barclay and Perkins never turned out ale equal to that." "See the advantage of being put on short allowance," moralized the doctor. "It is not great, after all," retorted Kennedy, "and if I were never again to have the pleasure of drinking water, I should agree on condition that I should never be deprived of it." At 6 o'clock the balloon was floating over the palm trees. They were 2 shriveled, stunted, dried-up specimens of trees, 2 ghosts of palms, without foliage and more dead than alive. Ferguson examined them with terror. At their feet could be seen the half-worn stones of a spring, but these stones, pulverized by the baking heat of the sun, seemed to be nothing now but impalpable dust. There was not the slightest sign of moisture. The doctor's heart shrank within him, and he was about to communicate his thoughts to his companions, when their exclamations attracted his attention. As far as the eye could reach to the eastward, extended a long line of whitened bones. Pieces of skeletons surrounded the fountain. A caravan had evidently made its way to that point, marking its progress by its bleaching remains. The weaker had fallen one by one upon the sand. The stronger, having at length reached this spring for which they panted, had there found a horrible death. Our travellers looked at each other and turned pale. "Let us not alight," said Kennedy. "Let us fly from this hideous spectacle. There's not a drop of water here." "No, Dick, as well pass the night here as elsewhere. Let us have a clear conscience in the matter. We'll dig down to the very bottom of the well. There has been a spring here, and perhaps there's something left in it." The Victoria touched the ground. Joe and Kennedy put into the car a quantity of sand equal to their weight and leaped out. They then hastened to the well and penetrated to the interior by a flight of steps that was now nothing but dust. The spring appeared to have been dry for years. They dug down into a parched and powdery sand, the very driest of all sand, indeed. There was not one trace of moisture. The doctor saw them come up to the surface of the desert, saturated with perspiration, worn out, covered with fine dust, exhausted, discouraged, and despairing. He then comprehended that their search had been fruitless. He had expected as much, and he kept silent, for he felt that from this moment forth he must have courage and energy enough for 3. Joe brought up with him some pieces of a leathern bottle that had grown hard and horn-like with age, and angrily flung them away among the bleaching bones of the caravan. At supper not a word was spoken by our travellers, and they even ate without appetite. Yet they had not up to this moment endured the real agonies of thirst, and were in no desponding mood, excepting for the future. Chapter 26. 113 degrees. The doctor's reflections. A desperate search. The cylinder goes out. 122 degrees. Contemplation of the desert. A night walk. Solitude. Debility. Joe's prospects. He gives himself 1 day more. The distance made by the balloon during the preceding day did not exceed 10 miles, and to keep it afloat, 162 cubic feet of gas had been consumed. On Saturday morning, the doctor again gave the signal for departure. "The cylinder can work only 6 hours longer, and if in that time we shall not have found either a well or a spring of water, God alone knows what will become of us." "Not much wind this morning, master," said Joe, "but it will come up perhaps," he added, suddenly remarking the doctor's ill-concealed depression. Vain hope, the atmosphere was in a dead calm, one of those calms which hold vessels captive in tropical seas. The heat had become intolerable, and the thermometer in the shade under the awning indicated 113 degrees. Joe and Kennedy, reclining at full length near each other, tried, if not in slumber, at least in torpor, to forget their situation, for their forced inactivity gave them periods of leisure far from pleasant. That man is to be pitied the most who cannot wean himself from gloomy reflections by actual work, or some practical pursuit. But here there was nothing to look after, nothing to undertake, and they had to submit to the situation without having it in their power to ameliorate it. The The pangs of thirst began to be severely felt. Brandy, far from appeasing this imperious necessity, augmented it, and richly merited the name of tiger's milk, applied to it by the African natives. Scarcely 2 pints of water remained, and that was heated. Each of the party devoured the few precious drops with his gaze, yet neither of them dared to moisten his lips with them. 2 pints of water in the midst of the desert. Then it was that Dr. Ferguson, buried in meditation, asked himself whether he had acted with prudence. Would he not have done better to have kept the water that he had decomposed in pure loss, in order to sustain him in the air? He had gained a little distance, to be sure, but was he any nearer to his journey's end? What difference did 60 miles to the rear make in this region, when there was no water to be had where they were? The wind, should it rise, would blow there as it did here, only less strongly at this point if it came from the east. But hope urged him onward, and yet those 2 gallons of water, expended in vain, would have sufficed for 9 days' halt in the desert. And what changes might not have occurred in 9 days? Perhaps, too, while retaining the water, he might have ascended by throwing out ballast at the cost merely of discharging some gas, when he had again to descend. But the gas in his balloon was his blood, his very life. 1,001 such reflections whirled in succession through his brain, and resting his head between his hands, he sat there for hours without raising it. "We must make one final effort," he said at last about 10 o'clock in the morning. "We must endeavor just once more to find an atmospheric current to bear us away from here, and to that end must risk our last resources." Therefore, while his companions slept, the doctor raised the hydrogen in the balloon to an elevated temperature, and the huge globe, filling out by the dilation of the gas, rose straight up in the perpendicular rays of the sun. The doctor searched vainly for a breath of wind, from the height of 100 feet to that of 5 miles. His starting point remained fatally right below him, and absolute calm seemed to reign, up to the extreme limits of the breathing atmosphere. At length the feeding supply of water gave out, the cylinder was extinguished for lack of gas, the Bunsen battery ceased to work, and the balloon, shrinking together, gently descended to the sand, in the very place that the car had hollowed out there. It was noon, and solar observations gave 19 degrees 35 minutes east longitude, and 6 degrees 51 minutes north latitude, or nearly 500 miles from Lake Tchad, and more than 400 miles from the western coast of Africa. On the balloon taking ground, Kennedy and Joe awoke from their stupor. "We have halted," said the Scot. "We had to do so," replied the doctor gravely. His companions understood him. The level of the soil at that point corresponded with the level of the sea, and consequently the balloon remained in perfect equilibrium and absolutely motionless. The weight of the 3 travelers was replaced with an equivalent quantity of sand, and they got out of the car. Each was absorbed in his own thoughts, and for many hours neither of them spoke. Joe prepared their evening meal, which consisted of biscuit and pemmican, and was hardly tasted by either of the party. A mouthful of scalding water from their little store completed this gloomy repast. During the night none of them kept awake, yet none could be precisely said to have slept. On the morrow there remained only half a pint of water, and this the doctor put away, all 3 having resolved not to touch it until the last extremity. It was not long, however, before Joe exclaimed, "I'm choking and the heat is getting worse. I'm not surprised at that though," he added, consulting the thermometer, 140 degrees. "The sand scorches me," said the hunter, "as though it had just come out of a furnace, and not a cloud in this sky of fire. It's enough to drive one mad." "Let us not despair," responded the doctor. "In this latitude these intense heats are invariably followed by storms, and the latter come with the suddenness of lightning. Notwithstanding this disheartening clearness of the sky, great atmospheric changes may take place in less than an hour." "But," asked Kennedy, "is there any sign whatever of that?" "Well," replied the doctor, "I think that there is some slight symptom of a fall in the barometer." "May heaven hearken to you, Samuel, for here we are pinned to the ground like a bird with broken wings." "With this difference, however, my dear Dick, that our wings are unhurt, and I hope that we shall be able to use them again." "Ah, wind, wind," exclaimed Joe. "Enough to carry us to a stream or a well and we'll be all right. We have provisions enough, and with water we could wait a month without suffering, but thirst is a cruel thing." It was not thirst alone, but the unchanging sight of the desert that fatigued the mind. There was not a variation in the surface of the soil, not a hillock of sand, not a pebble to relieve the gaze. This unbroken level discouraged the beholder and gave him that kind of malady called the desert sickness. The impassable monotony of the arid blue sky and the vast yellow expanse of the desert sand at length produced a sensation of terror. In this inflamed atmosphere the heat appeared to vibrate as it does above a blazing hearth, while the mind grew desperate in contemplating the limitless calm, and could see no reason why the thing should ever end, since immensity is a species of eternity. Thus at last our hapless travellers, deprived of water in this torrid heat, began to feel symptoms of mental disorder. Their eyes swelled in their sockets, and their gaze became confused. When night came on, the doctor determined to combat this alarming tendency by rapid walking. His idea was to pace the sandy plain for a few hours, not in search of anything, but simply for exercise. "Come along," he said to his companions. "Believe me, it will do you good." "Out of the question," said Kennedy. "I could not walk a step." "And I," said Joe, "would rather sleep." "But sleep or even rest would be dangerous to you, my friends. You must react against this tendency to stupor. Come with me." But the doctor could do nothing with them, and therefore set off alone amid the starry clearness of the night. The first few steps he took were painful, for they were the steps of an enfeebled man quite out of practice in walking. However, he quickly saw that the exercise would be beneficial to him, and pushed on several miles to the westward. Once in rapid motion, he felt his spirits greatly cheered, when suddenly a vertigo came over him. He seemed to be poised on the edge of an abyss, his knees bent under him. The vast solitude struck terror to his heart. He found himself the minute mathematical point, the center of an infinite circumference, that is to say, a nothing. The balloon had disappeared entirely in the deepening gloom. The doctor, cool, impassible, reckless explorer that he was, felt himself at last seized with a nameless dread. He strove to retrace his steps, but in vain. He called aloud. Not even an echo replied, and his voice died out in the empty vastness of surrounding space, like a pebble cast into a bottomless gulf. Then down he sank, fainting on the sand, alone, amid the eternal silence of the desert. At midnight he came to in the arms of his faithful follower, Joe. The latter, uneasy at his master's prolonged absence, had set out after him, easily tracing him by the clear imprint of his feet in the sand, and had found him lying in a swoon. "What has been the matter, sir?" was the first inquiry. "Nothing, Joe, nothing. Only a touch of weakness, that's all. It's over now." "Oh, it won't amount to anything, sir, I'm sure of that, but get up on your feet if you can. There, lean upon me and let us get back to the balloon." And the doctor, leaning on Joe's arm, returned along the track by which he had come. "You were too bold, sir. It won't do to run such risks. You might have been robbed," he added, laughing. "But sir, come now, let us talk seriously." "Speak, I am listening to you." "We must positively make up our minds to do something. Our present situation cannot last more than a few days longer, and if we get no wind, we are lost." The doctor made no reply. "Well then, one of us must sacrifice himself for the good of all, and it is most natural that it should fall to me to do so." "What have you to propose? What is your plan?" "A very simple one. It is to take provisions enough and to walk right on until I come to some place, as I must do, sooner or later. In the meantime, if heaven sends you a good wind, you need not wait but can start again. For my part, if I come to a village, I'll work my way through with a few Arabic words that you can write for me on a slip of paper, and I'll bring you help or lose my hide. What do you think of my plan?" "It is absolute folly, Joe, but worthy of your noble heart. The thing is impossible. You will not leave us." "But sir, we must do something, and this plan can't do you any harm, for I say again, you need not wait. And then after all I may succeed." "No, Joe, no, we will not separate. That would only be adding sorrow to trouble. It was written that matters should be as they are, and it is very probably written that it shall be quite otherwise by and by. Let us wait then with resignation." "So be it, master, but take notice of one thing. I give you a day longer and I'll not wait after that. Today is Sunday, we might say Monday, as it is 1 o'clock in the morning, and if we don't get off by Tuesday I'll run the risk. I've made up my mind to that." The doctor made no answer, and in a few minutes they got back to the car, where he took his place beside Kennedy, who lay there plunged in silence so complete that it could not be considered sleep. Chapter 27. Terrific heat, hallucinations, the last drops of water, nights of despair, an attempt at suicide, the Samum, the oasis, the lion and lioness. The doctor's first care on the morrow was to consult the barometer. He found that the mercury had scarcely undergone any perceptible depression. "Nothing," he murmured, "nothing." He got out of the car and scrutinized the weather. There was only the same heat, the same cloudless sky, the same merciless drought. "Must we then give up to despair?" he exclaimed in agony. Joe did not open his lips. He was buried in his own thoughts and planning the expedition he had proposed. Kennedy got up, feeling very ill and a prey to nervous agitation. He was suffering horribly with thirst, and his swollen tongue and lips could hardly articulate a syllable. There still remained a few drops of water. Each of them knew this, and each was thinking of it and felt himself drawn toward them, but neither of the three dared to take a step. Those three men, friends and companions as they were, fixed their haggard eyes upon each other with an instinct of ferocious longing, which was most plainly revealed in the hardy Scot, whose vigorous constitution yielded the soonest to these unnatural privations. Throughout the day he was delirious, pacing up and down, uttering hoarse cries, gnawing his clenched fists and ready to open his veins and drink his own hot blood. "Ah," he cried, "land of thirst, well might you be called the land of despair." At length he sank down in utter prostration, and his friends heard no other sound from him than the hissing of his breath between his parched and swollen lips. Toward evening, Joe had his turn of delirium. The vast expanse of sand appeared to him an immense pond, full of clear and limpid water, and more than once he dashed himself upon the scorching waste to drink long draughts, and rose again with his mouth clogged with hot dust. "Curses on it," he yelled in his madness, "it's nothing but salt water." Then, while Ferguson and Kennedy lay there motionless, the resistless longing came over him to drain the last few drops of water that had been kept in reserve. The natural instinct proved too strong. He dragged himself toward the car on his knees. He glared at the bottle containing the precious fluid. He gave one wild, eager glance, seized the treasured store, and bore it to his lips. At that instant he heard a heart-rending cry close beside him, "Water, water!" It was Kennedy, who had crawled up close to him, and was begging there upon his knees and weeping piteously. Joe, himself in tears, gave the poor wretch the bottle, and Kennedy drained the last drop with savage haste. "Thanks," he murmured hoarsely, but Joe did not hear him, for both alike had dropped fainting on the sand. What took place during that fearful night neither of them knew, but on Tuesday morning, under those showers of heat which the sun poured down upon them, the unfortunate men felt their limbs gradually drying up, and when Joe attempted to rise he found it impossible. He looked around him. In the car the doctor, completely overwhelmed, sat with his arms folded on his breast, gazing with idiotic fixedness upon some imaginary point in space. Kennedy was frightful to behold. He was rolling his head from right to left like a wild beast in a cage. All at once his eyes rested on the butt of his rifle, which jutted above the rim of the car. "Ah!" he screamed, raising himself with a superhuman effort. Desperate mad, he snatched at the weapon and turned the barrel toward his mouth. "Kennedy!" shouted Joe, throwing himself upon his friend. "Let go, hands off," moaned the Scot in a hoarse, grating voice, and then the two struggled desperately for the rifle. "Let go or I'll kill you," repeated Kennedy. But Joe clung to him only the more fiercely, and they had been contending thus without the doctor seeing them for many seconds, when suddenly the rifle went off. At the sound of its discharge, the doctor rose up erect like a spectre and glared around him. But all at once his glance grew more animated. He extended his hand toward the horizon, and in a voice no longer human shrieked, "There, off there!" There was such fearful force in the cry that Kennedy and Joe released each other, and both looked where the doctor pointed. The plain was agitated like the sea shaken by the fury of a tempest. Billows of sand went tossing over each other amid blinding clouds of dust. An immense pillar was seen whirling toward them through the air from the southeast, with terrific velocity. The sun was disappearing behind an opaque veil of cloud, whose enormous barrier extended clear to the horizon, while the grains of fine sand went gliding together with all the supple ease of liquid particles, and the rising dust tide gained more and more with every second. Ferguson's eyes gleamed with a ray of energetic hope. "The simoom!" he exclaimed. "The simoom," repeated Joe without exactly knowing what it meant. "So much the better," said Kennedy with the bitterness of despair. "So much the better we shall die." So much the better, echoed the doctor, for we shall live, and so saying he began rapidly to throw out the sand that encumbered the car. At length his companions understood him, and took their places at his side. And now, Joe, said the doctor, throw out some 50 pounds of your ore there. Joe no longer hesitated, although he still felt a fleeting pang of regret. The balloon at once began to ascend. It was high time, said the doctor. The simoom, in fact, came rushing on like a thunderbolt, and a moment later the balloon would have been crushed, torn to atoms, annihilated. The awful whirlwind was almost upon it, and it was already pelted with showers of sand driven like hail by the storm. Out with more ballast, shouted the doctor. There, responded Joe, tossing over a huge fragment of quartz. With this, the Victoria rose swiftly above the range of the whirling column, but caught in the vast displacement of the atmosphere thereby occasioned, it was borne along with incalculable rapidity away above this foaming sea. The three travellers did not speak. They gazed and hoped and even felt refreshed by the breath of the tempest. About 3 o'clock the whirlwind ceased. The sand, falling again upon the desert, formed numberless little hillocks, and the sky resumed its former tranquillity. The balloon, which had again lost its momentum, was floating in sight of an oasis, a sort of islet studded with green trees, thrown up upon the surface of this sandy ocean. Water, we'll find water there, said the doctor. And instantly, opening the upper valve, he let some hydrogen escape and slowly descended, taking the ground at about 200 feet from the edge of the oasis. In 4 hours the travellers had swept over a distance of 240 miles. The car was at once ballasted, and Kennedy, closely followed by Joe, leaped out. Take your guns with you, said the doctor. Take your guns and be careful. Dick grasped his rifle, and Joe took one of the fowling pieces. They then rapidly made for the trees, and disappeared under the fresh verdure, which announced the presence of abundant springs. As they hurried on, they had not taken notice of certain large footprints and fresh tracks of some living creature marked here and there in the damp soil. Suddenly, a dull roar was heard not 20 paces from them. The roar of a lion, said Joe. Good for that, said the excited hunter. We'll fight him. A man feels strong when only a fight's in question. But be careful, Mr. Kennedy, be careful. The lives of all depend upon the life of one. But Kennedy no longer heard him. He was pushing on, his eye blazing, his rifle cocked, fearful to behold in his daring rashness. There, under a palm tree, stood an enormous black-maned lion, crouching for a spring on his antagonist. Scarcely had he caught a glimpse of the hunter when he bounded through the air, but he had not touched the ground ere a bullet pierced his heart, and he fell to the earth dead. Hurrah, hurrah, shouted Joe with wild exultation. Kennedy rushed toward the well, slid down the dampened steps, and flung himself at full length by the side of a fresh spring, in which he plunged his parched lips. Joe followed suit, and for some minutes nothing was heard but the sound they made with their mouths, drinking more like maddened beasts than men. Take care, Mr. Kennedy, said Joe at last. Let us not overdo the thing, and he panted for breath. But Kennedy, without a word, drank on. He even plunged his hands and then his head into the delicious tide. He fairly revelled in its coolness. But the doctor, said Joe, our friend Dr. Ferguson. That one word recalled Kennedy to himself, and hastily filling a flask that he had brought with him, he started on a run up the steps of the well. But what was his amazement when he saw an opaque body of enormous dimensions blocking up the passage. Joe, who was close upon Kennedy's heels, recoiled with him. We are blocked in, entrapped. Impossible, what does that mean? Dick had no time to finish. A terrific roar made him only too quickly aware what foe confronted him. Another lion, exclaimed Joe. A lioness rather, said Kennedy. Ah, ferocious brute. He added, I'll settle you in a moment more, and swiftly reloaded his rifle. In another instant he fired, but the animal had disappeared. Onward, shouted Kennedy. No, interposed the other. That shot did not kill her. Her body would have rolled down the steps. She's up there, ready to spring upon the first of us who appears, and he would be a lost man. But what are we to do? We must get out of this, and the doctor is expecting us. Let us decoy the animal. Take my piece and give me your rifle. What is your plan? You'll see. and Joe, taking off his linen jacket, hung it on the end of the rifle and thrust it above the top of the steps. The lioness flung herself furiously upon it. Kennedy was on the alert for her, and his bullet broke her shoulder. The lioness, with a frightful howl of agony, rolled down the steps, overturning Joe in her fall. The poor fellow imagined that he could already feel the enormous paws of the savage beast in his flesh, when a second detonation resounded in the narrow passage, and Dr. Ferguson appeared at the opening above with his gun in hand, and still smoking from the discharge. Joe leaped to his feet, clambered over the body of the dead lioness, and handed up the flask full of sparkling water to his master. To carry it to his lips, and to half empty it at a draught, was the work of an instant, and the three travellers offered up thanks from the depths of their hearts to that Providence who had so miraculously saved them. Chapter 28. An evening of delight, Joe's culinary performance, a dissertation on raw meat, the narrative of James Bruce, camping out, Joe's dreams, the barometer begins to fall, the barometer rises again, preparations for departure, the tempest. The evening was lovely, and our three friends enjoyed it in the cool shade of the mimosas, after a substantial repast, at which the tea and the punch were dealt out with no niggardly hand. Kennedy had traversed the little domain in all directions. He had ransacked every thicket and satisfied himself that the balloon party were the only living creatures in this terrestrial paradise, so they stretched themselves upon their blankets and passed a peaceful night that brought them forgetfulness of their past sufferings. On the morrow, May 7th, the sun shone with all his splendor, but his rays could not penetrate the dense screen of the palm tree foliage, and as there was no lack of provisions, the doctor resolved to remain where he was while waiting for a favorable wind. Joe had conveyed his portable kitchen to the oasis, and proceeded to indulge in any number of culinary combinations, using water all the time with the most profuse extravagance. What a strange succession of annoyances and enjoyments, moralized Kennedy, such abundance as this after such privations, such luxury after such want. Ah, I nearly went mad.